Greetings! For this module, I'm going to walk you through a few computer software steps that might help you in the future as you're working with visual images on your computer. We're going to principally be using Photoshop today. When we come to class, you're going to have access to a folder with these same documents in it, and I'm going to experiment with them just a little bit. I'm going to grab one of the images and drag it down onto the dock and drop it into Photoshop. That opens Photoshop and opens up the image at the same time within the program. This is a set designed for the Caucasian chalk circle. And once we get an image into the computer, we may need to adjust it or manipulate it in some way. We can do that fairly easily using some of the tools that are in Photoshop, because that's really one of the strengths of Photoshop, manipulating images, changing them from one format to another. So we're going to play a little bit with that on this image just for a moment, and then we'll play with a few more. As I'm looking at this image, one thing I'm concerned about is, because I'm working with a color image, is I want to make sure that when I print this out, I'll be able to get a fairly accurate color system for it. And if I'm going to paint on it, I want to make sure I'm using colors that work well with the printer that I'll be using. One thing that Photoshop does that's really very helpful is if you open up the color information, like over here, it'll open up a color picker, allowing you to look at the full range of colors you can pick, and then colors within that range. So once I get into my deep lavender, I can then pick something in this range here, or over here, or over here. It'll show me the color I'm choosing and the color I've been at, so I can always compare one way or the other. One thing I want you to notice, though, to be very careful of when you're working with colors, is the fact that as you're selecting colors, you might get an exclamation mark over here. That tells you that you have picked a difficult color for most printers to match. It's going to be fairly hard because it's not an indexed color. You already should know what that means. That means it's not one of the common colors. If you simply click on this box, it will click over to another color that's fairly close to it, but that is indexed, so you'll have a better match. This might be a really wise thing for you to do, is work within safe color ranges. It'll be a lot easier for you to pick them later on and match them up and make them work in a printer. I want you to also notice over here some things that you already know about colors. This will allow me to adjust the hue, the saturation, and the brightness of my color. So I can choose within ranges there that will work. I can work within the RGB color range if I really want to. And I've already picked a color, and it's telling me where it falls within all of these gamuts. You should be familiar with that by now. I'm not going to get into the lab, LAB, because this is for photography and we're not going to get into those particulars. But over here you should recognize the CMYK. So if I'm working in CMYK, I know what color range I'm working in here, what percent is cyan and magenta, the mix for my color that I've chosen. And down here, I mentioned to you the Pantone color range. Here is the Pantone color catalog number that you could actually perhaps find papers that might match this if you wanted to try to match it exactly. So this color window or color picker is a great place for you to work within the range of colors you need to work with, so that they're printer safe, so that they allow you to achieve a color that you can get out in an output fairly reasonably as you're just selecting colors. Again, there was another color that has a problem. One thing you might want to do as you're looking at your image is you might want to adjust simply its lightness and its darkness. So I'm going to use some of the filters that you can actually use. You can go to Image and Adjustments, and you'll see that I'm able to adjust quite a few different things. Levels is one thing that we're going to use a lot, and hue and saturation. So if I happen to be in hue and saturation and I'm looking at my picture and I'm afraid these colors are a little hot, I could simply take the saturation down a little bit. You'll notice that I'm slowly killing the colors, pulling it down so it's not quite so intense. Or on the other scale, I can push it up so it's brighter. It'll enhance all the colors, saturate them a bit more. So I can just adjust that right here on my scale. I can work within the hue ranges if I want to. This is a really dangerous one. If you're not sure what you're actually doing here, I wouldn't suggest you do a lot. But one we will use an awful lot is the lightness. If my picture happened to be very dark, I could just pull up the overall lightness of that picture and the range in those colors. And so now I've got lighter ranges. There's the value contrast, or darker. So we're going to play with this in just a moment also in some adjustments we're going to need. This is really an image that's not too bad. If I say OK, it will obviously change to what I've said. Or I could go back and say step backwards, and it would undo what I just did. Learn the command keys more quickly. So step backward is just Command Z to undo what you just did. But if I wanted to go back and change that back, I could do this choice right here would move me back to the thing that I just did. So I can choose to go back and forth between those using keys on the keyboard or using the menu items. Okay, that's enough to just kind of introduce you. Let's get out of this image. I'm just going to quit for right now. I'm not going to save anything. And I want to go into some of the images that I already have. So I'm going to take the shield and pull that down into Photoshop. And sometimes when you have an image that you've brought in, it's not really in the best order. So the first thing we want to do is zoom into this image, and we'll use the magnifying glass tool. You'll note when I pull that out that it automatically is in plus mode. That means it will zoom in, so if I click, it will slowly zoom in. If I just click and hold and pull back and forth, it will zoom way in. I can hold down the Option key, and you'll notice that now it turns to a negative, and if I click now or drag, it will pull out of the image so I can get it exactly where I want it to be. You're going to notice that I actually made this image from a hand-drawn sketch, and it is got some problems because the paper is old, it's wrinkled a little bit. We want to clean this up a little bit. So I'm going to show you how to clean up an image, and we're going to get to do that in class together. One of the first things I want to do is I want to grab this tool, which is the Move tool. It's a command, it's just V on the computer, so if you hit V, it will turn to that automatically. Also, anytime you want to move something around, just hold down the Shift key, and it'll turn to a hand and allow you to move the image around on your screen so you can get to where you need to be. That's handy if I happen to be zoomed into an image and I want to move somewhere else. I just hold down the Shift key, move to where I want to go, and then as soon as I let go of the Shift key, I'm back on the tool I was originally on. That's very handy to have. Back to the Move tool. So the Move tool allows me to move objects around on the screen, as it were. I am going to get to a place in the picture that I need to correct maybe just a little bit, but first I'm going to do what I should do first of all. I want to make sure that this picture is true to my screen. One of the first things I should do is get my image out of the background. Things in the background have a semi-lock attached to them, so there's some tools that won't necessarily work. So I'm going to simply select everything. That's Command A. Under Select All is Command A. And then most of you probably already know that copy is Command C. And now that I've got it in memory, I am going to then paste it. So an image has been pasted on another layer. I've got duplicate images here. If you look at the little tiny images, you'll see those. I'm then going to go to the background and I'm going to select all again, and I'm going to hit delete. It's going to ask me what I would like to turn it into. I'm making it go away, and I would like it to be white, and that's what it's trying to do right there, but I could choose it to go black or gray or whatever I want. I want white. Now I've got a neutral background and one layer that has my sketch on it. In fact, I'm going to change the name on this by clicking on it and call it the sketch so I know what I'm working on. All right, the next thing I need to do is make sure that my image is true to my screen. Oh, I'm looking. I've got marching ants. That's always death. Always deselect with Command D because I could accidentally hit delete and I could erase something that I don't want to erase. I'm going to now alter this layer Because I can tell that it's not really probably in true mode, I'm going to go to the line tool and I'm going to click and hold the shift key down as I drag to get a perfectly vertical line. And I can see that this is not in true line with the rest of my screen. So I want to move this image just a little bit. Fortunately, that line has created its own layer. So I'm going to go back to the sketch and I'm going to go up to Edit. Halfway down is Transform, and I'm going to rotate this image by hand. Little handles have appeared here, and I can now grab that, and I'm going to pivot it until it lines up better with that line on the side. That looks better right there. In fact, I can move that over just to make sure that it's pretty true, and that's not bad at all. Once I've decided that that's exactly how I'd like it, I have to either say no, don't do it, or yes, let's do it, and I want a yes, let's do it. Let's check that. And now I have gotten my piece of paper a little more true to my view window. I don't need this line anymore. So I'm going to select it and drag it down and drop it in the little garbage can. Don't need it anymore. There's my sketch. There's my background. That's what I need. I want to clean this. First of all, I have lots of wrinkles and things in the image that I just really don't like. So I'm going to go up to the image, adjustment, to levels. We talked about color manipulation and hue and saturation. This is an image of how much black there is to how much white there is. Quite a bit of white in this screen. If I were to pull the black down, it would get darker. And I would get closer to the dark ranges, and all the darks would pop out. I'm not going to go that far. But what I do want to do is play with the other scale. I want to lighten this enough out of the black tones, and as I do that, it will bleach my paper out, and a lot of my incidental wrinkles will all go away. So I don't have to spend a lot of time erasing and trying to fix my image. So this is probably the first thing you'd like to be able to do, is just adjust with the levels enough of the bad part of the image, of the highlights, that you just don't need anymore. Say OK, and I'm going to move around my image and get a feeling of how that looks. That's a lot better. OK. Now, I'm going to go back to my levels, and that's Command L. And I'm going to adjust the darkness. Now that I lighten it a lot, I'm going to darken some of the lines so I can just see them better. And say OK there. That's pretty good. Now I've adjusted, and there's some things I still want to get rid of, and I'll get rid of them in a minute. As we start to clean up, I want you to think about ways you could do that. I want you to think about, you could probably use an eraser. That seems like the most logical. And we could just go around and start erasing all this yucky stuff that we just don't want in our picture. Well, that works to some degree, and I could just kind of keep cleaning my picture up. Careful not to, oops, if I do that, then I can just back up that one step backwards and undo my eraser, Command Z, which I'll do, and I fixed that. But there's a problem in using the eraser. Remember that this is a sheet of paper over a white background. And because I'm erasing it, white is coming through, and that looks pretty darn good. However, if I ever went back, well, and decided to fill my background with a color like green, not sure why I would ever do that, so I'm in the background, I'm going to now fill it with green. Every place I erased is now going to be that color. Eraser may not be the best thing to have done. So I'm going to back out of that, and I'm going to undo all that erasing that I did that looks so great. Oops, that I just undid the darkness, so I'm going to go back and redo that. I liked that. Good point to mention. When you've reached a point and you've done something you like, might be a good idea to save. I wouldn't save over your original image. Save as, and call this Shield 1. Now, I do want it to be a Photoshop document, because that will save the layers. And I'm going to save that to my desktop. Now, if I need to go back to this version for some reason, I can. A better option for erasing. Let's use a paint tool instead. And I'm going to paint, I'm going to click here and I automatically go to black and white, because usually we're doing black text on a white background, but I'm going to flip that. So I have white in my paintbrush. And now I'm going to do the exact same thing that I did, and it looks like, yes indeed, I'm erasing. I am going to change the flow and opacity because it thinks if I'm painting, I don't want to paint 100%, and I do right now. I'm going to just start painting out some of this detail. I can enlarge the size of my brush by either coming up here and adjusting it here, and I can pick a brush that has a hard edge or a soft edge, whichever I choose. And I'm at 60 pixels now. I could just increase it by doing this, but I can't see what I'm actually doing on the screen. The way I prefer to actually do this, and if I click, that goes away, is if I hit the right bracket, it increments my brush up for me. If I hit the left bracket key, it goes down. That's a lot easier, and I can actually see the size of that in relationship to my picture. Okay, I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and I'm going to move up where there were pieces I wanted to get rid of, and I'm going to paint this out. Get rid of some of these blemishes, the things that I really don't want to see. There was a place down here where tape was put on the original picture. I'm going to paint that out as well. Now I don't want to paint out things until I fix them. And I do want to go back and I want to put in more true lines in here instead of these hand-drawn images. I'm not going to fix everything because I'm going to allow you to do some of those things on your own when you have this image to play with. But I want you to note that because I've painted, if I now go back and do a colored background of some sort, we'll do red this time, and I drop that on there. The places where I painted, let me point out, are fine. The places I had used an eraser are not. I could go back with the bucket tool and fill that area with white back on my sketch. But you'll notice that the paint bucket stops a little bit before the line. If I hit it again, it usually will go past the line just enough that I could fill that back in with white. So indeed I could use an eraser, but I would have to go back and fix it with a little bit more white. So we probably should use a brush and paint it similar to the background color that we're using. Now I could clean all of this up by zooming in and looking at this line weight here. I could use my brush tool, make that a little smaller, and I could clean that up by just painting along that edge and thinning those lines out. But I want to show you another way you can also clean using the brush tool in a little safer means. You may not be really good with your straight hand. If you click and then hold down your Shift key and move your mouse, it will paint a straight line between the two for you. I just have to now click, and it's a little easier to maneuver that and get a cleaner line of what I'm trying to do, rather than try to manipulate that freehand, which is tricky to do. I could go in and clean all this up, and you're going to be doing that in class, and you're smart enough to figure that out by yourself. I'm going to use the hand tool and move around here just a little bit. I'm going to use my click and hold here to kind of thin this line out, get it cleaned up a little bit. Back and forth, click this one, clean it up just a little bit. Okay, that's enough to give you an idea of what you could basically do. One other thing, zooming out, I want to do is I want to add lines that are better than these lines. I can do that with just a brush if I wanted to. I could change the brush to black. I could then use the brush tool and I could thin that way down to a small fine line, and I could click here and then click out here and get a nice straight line. That's a great way to do it. My suggestion if I'm going to start making these kind of changes, I'm going to undo that, is that I want to change, add another layer. And I'm going to call this the lines. And now when I create this, I'm going to do this over the top of my other lines, creating cleaner lines. Let's just go all the way down on this one. Okay, that works. I think you can see what I'm doing here. Getting nicer lines. I want to redo the arrowheads, and I also know that if I hit the Shift key, it will Give me those nice straight lines. So I added in some nice straight lines, and then I'm going to use my eraser tool. And I'm going to come back, and I'm on the line mode. I don't want to be in my sketch mode because I don't want to affect that. And I'm going to just erase these lines so that I can get back to my measurements. Okay. Pull this down. Make that just a little bit smaller perhaps. Okay. And then I'm going to be able to come and get my text tool, and I could type in the 0 feet 9 inches so it'll look a little nicer. I can also highlight that, decide I'm going to pull it up a little bit bigger to maybe a 14, maybe an 18. And I'm going to change my font to something that has less frou-frou to it. Something that looks a little better. I'm going to use chalkboard. It looks a little more hand-drawn. I like that a little bit better. And notice that whenever I made text, it instantly made, because text is a vector layer, please note. I can't go in and erase this. The other layers are all erasable. And because it's got its own layer, I can go back and edit it. And I'm going to just rotate it counterclockwise. And then I can physically move that into this location. Let me do one of those again. I'm going to do another. I have a 4 foot 0 inch, and it remembers, whoops, that's not correct. 0 inch. Okay. And I want to move that up here, and then I want to rotate it. I could do it by hand if I wanted it at an angle, or I could just use the flip it clockwise or counterclockwise. Because I just did that, I have to then click the key to accept it up above. And if I want to fine tune it, I can use my little arrow keys and manipulate it right exactly where I want it. Perfect. Okay? Then what I'll do once I've gotten these all the numbers in as I want to, I'm going to go back to my sketch, and I'm going to take my paintbrush, because I don't want to erase, remember. I'm going to go back to white paint. I'm going to make it larger, and then I'm going to paint out the hand-drawn lines and the numbers below. And eventually I'll have a really nice clean look once I've got all my lines in, and you could see how to do most of that. Doesn't mean I want to go back and redraw all these things. I could take my circular tool and redraw these, move them around, get them just right. So I could really clean this up if I wanted to. But I particularly would probably like to go back and redo some of this hand-drawn and do Hector's shield for Trojan women. Now, notice that I just used white ink, so it's there, but I'm going to have to physically, and I'm on the layer with that one. Hard to find this, so I'm going to place it somewhere I can find it a little better. There it is. Put it over the shield for just a minute. And now if I go back to my space, I can find the entire thing, highlight all of it. And I'm going to change it to black so I can actually see it, first of all. That's a little easier to work with. I'm going to also then select it again, and I'm going to enlarge it to maybe 48. Oh, maybe that's a little much. Let's back off to 30. That looks just a little bit better. Put that over the top of this, go back to my sketch layer, get my paintbrush, change back to white paint, and let's just get rid of this lettering behind that we really don't need. We'll come back and do the other one later on. Anyway, so you can see how you can fix this entire picture so it looks a little bit nicer, it's a little bit cleaner. Once you're all done, you're going to want to crop this because it's just an odd shape. So I'm going to suggest you use the marquee tool and drag, click and drag around the image to the size you'd like it to be. And once you're done, you're going to go up to Image, Crop, and now you have a more manageable, Command D for deselect, get rid of the marching ants, and you could finish cleaning up this image. This is something you're going to be doing in class. We're going to work on this together, so you can Review this as much as you need to, but I want to move on and show you something else you can do while you're in Photoshop. So I'm going to quit this and I'm not going to save anything. Sometimes when you're scanning, notice over here, these little images on the side, you have to scan in pieces because your image is so large. And in fact, let me go to props, because that one image we had of the shield was actually brought in two pieces, and I assembled it. But I'm going to show you how to assemble these images. So I'm going to select all four of them by holding the Shift key, drag them down onto Photoshop, and I'm going to bring all four images in and show you how to put them back together in Photoshop. So I want to find one of the corner images. The top left corner is probably my favorite one here. Let's just use this. I know that I've got this piece in this image in 4 pieces. So I'm going to choose the top left, and I'm going to go up to canvas size. Canvas is the full image of the screen in which I'm working. And I'm going to open this canvas size, and I'm going to see that my image is a little over 8 inches wide and a little over 11 inches, 11.5 inches tall. I need to increase, and I know I'm going to be putting 4 images next to each other and overlapping them. So I'm going to make this 16 inches, twice its size, and this one 22, twice its size. If I clicked here, it would add all the way around my image, and I don't want that. My image is the top left corner, so I want it to add out and away this direction. So I'm going to have it double the length and the width, and I want it to be white, and because I hadn't picked white over here. And if I click yes, there we go. I'm going to hold down my space bar, and I can drag you around and show you that I've got 1/4 of my picture done. Let's now find the other half of the top of the picture. I think it's this one. Nope, it's not. There it is. So I'm going to do Command A for select all, Command C for copy, and then I'm going to go back to that image and Command V, paste it in. Hello, come on in. There it is. Notice that it created a new layer, and I'm going to now use my Move tool to show you that I can move it around. Okay, and this would actually go somewhere over here, right? What I want you to notice is a problem in scanning. Because a scanner bed has an inset sheet of glass, there is a border around it. So if you lay an image over the top of it, it has to go up and over, and when it scans, you get a shadow from that edge. We can correct that. We have plenty of paper here and plenty of copy of her to do that. So I'm going to kind of match her up fairly well. I'm going to use the fine tuning of my arrow keys to get it right. And I could just use the marquee tool, and I could select this overlap area and erase it. And that's not a bad match. That works pretty well. Okay, I'm going to show you another way to do that here in just a moment, because you can kind of lightly still see this edge. Well, that's okay for right now. We'll come back and fix that. Let's go ahead and put in some of the bottom edges and show you some other ways of doing what we need to do. I want to try to get this other bottom left. Now the problem is it's upside down. That looks to be it. I'm going to go up to Image, and I'm going to rotate it 180 degrees. There it is. I'm going to do Command A for select all, Command C for copy, and then I'm going to go back to my image and Command V to paste it. Now I want my Move tool, and I'm going to, when I'm trying to cover up this much of an image, I really would rather be able to see what's underneath, because that's really kind of a hard match. So I'm going to go over here to the right to opacity. That is how opaque this layer is that I just added. I'm going to change it to about maybe 50%. And now I can see through my image to the image below. I may have thought I was getting close, but I'm way off. Now I can move it around. And I'll know when I'm there because the picture will come into focus. Let me just adjust up and down with my little arrows, and that's a pretty good match right there. Okay, I'm going to leave that, and I'm going to turn that back on. And now I want to get rid of all this edge. And I could do that with my marquee tool, but it's actually better with your eraser. The eraser, and I'm going to enlarge it just a little bit, allows me to erase only how much I need to, and it gives it an irregular edge, so it blends in just a little better than a straight cut edge does, because I can go right up to an edge that'll help camouflage the difference in the papers just a little bit. So that worked pretty well. I'm going to go along here and clean this edge and go right along the edge of her body just a little bit. And that cleans up pretty well. Let's go down here. Okay, that's a pretty good blend, it looks like to me. I'm going to bring in the last part of my picture. I don't need that one. That's the one I'm using. That's the one we've already brought in. Here's the remaining piece. So I need to rotate it 180 degrees. Command A, select all, Command C, copy, and then go back to my image and Command V, drop it into place. Again, it put it on a new layer. Whenever you paste something into Photoshop, it gives you a new layer automatically. Always make sure you're on the Move tool now. We want to get this one into place. And so we're going to overlap it to see how she works. We can even change the opacity just to make sure. We can then fine-tune it. Let's push her up and over. Now sometimes you may notice that they don't exactly match, and that's because as you were laying them on the scanner, they got off a little bit in angle. So I could actually go into Edit and Transform and Scale, Rotate, and I could rotate that to make sure it's really matching exactly where I want it, and then say OK. Once that's done, I go back to my full opacity, I get my eraser, and I clean up this last top layer and work in. And now I'm going to really notice if the lines worked, if they really match well. See how they're moving around just a little bit? They weren't exact, but as long as I stay away from all the lines, I can adjust them. I've got a little change of color down the middle of her dress, so I'm going to just kind of rub that in and make it work. Okay, and that's pretty good. Overall, we've got a pretty good image. We still need to clean it up just a little bit. So now I'm going to go to the layers, and I'm going to flatten the entire image. Watch the 4 over here when I hit flatten. It all becomes one picture. You know me, I'm going to want to raise that up and put a neutral white behind it, but right now I'm just cleaning, so I'm not too worried. But I have some problems up here. Here was the first layer that we didn't erase through, so we have a little change of color here. I have, because of the scan, I lost part of my paper here, and here was a rip in my piece over here. Let's go to the bottom. I have the same miss over here. And this is not too bad, and I can clean most of this up. I do have some erasing I want to do here and fixing this so that I don't have ripples in my paper where it got wet. The problem is I'm in color. If I start erasing now, I'll be erasing to white, and I really don't want to do that. I don't want to just suddenly go this, and oh, I'm actually erasing to black. Let me change that around. Okay, now I'm erasing to white. I probably really don't want to do that. So let's back out of that one. I'm going to introduce you to 2 other tools. This is the Band-Aid tool, and if you click and hold down, it's actually called the Healing Brush tool. That one's a really nice tool, and I'll show you what it does. Again, I can adjust it by using my bracket key to get what size I want it to be. If I am in part of the picture where I want it to blend, see how this color doesn't match that color? Then what I do is I set an anchor. I'm going to decide what part of the picture I like that works pretty well, and I'm going to say I really kind of like this area. It's fairly clean. So I'm going to hold down the Option key, and it makes a click right there. I just set an anchor right there. Now I'm going to go up here and get rid of all this wrinkle that I have. Watch below what happens here. As I start to paint, it uses the information from that part of my picture, and then as soon as I let go, it will average between the two, and this is what it will look like. It's not perfect. It had to try to match grain. It had to try to match a lot of different things. So it's not maybe the most effective, but I'm going to now just paint out in between these two colors. And if I have to blend a couple of colors together, it does a fairly good job. And it's always going to use that information where I clicked, no matter if I go over here and start painting again and adding in paper, it will adjust between. That's kind of ugly. We don't like that because it adjusted the white and the black shadow was there. But it always uses this information. Let me show you, undo that one, show you another tool. This is the stamp tool. It's a clone stamp. A clone makes a direct copy. So I'm going to pick the exact same area we were in before, hold the Option key, make a click. I'm going to go back up to this part of the paper. I'm going to adjust the size, and I'm going to now copy that paper right there. It just used that information, and it can fill in. But notice as I go down, it's going to start taking part of her sleeve into that image. We probably don't want that. So I have to keep adjusting it. I'm going to come back up here to a piece that's a little closer. I know it'll match maybe just a little bit better. Here's a problem with this tool. I have clicked here, correct? And that's where I set my foundation, right there. And the first time I start painting, what it does is it notices the relationship between my brush and the original point. And so if I paint, you'll notice that I'm going to get the E in there. That makes sense. But now let's say I want to go over here, down here and fix this. It stays in relationship to where I was, and so now it keeps painting. So you have to get used to both tools. They think a little differently. So whenever I want to paint with this one, I have to reset its anchor point, get part of it done. And then if I want to come over here, it's going to start using the information off my paper. So I'm going to have to set a point here and paint over here now. Please note that this one doesn't try to blend between, so I get a better copy of what the paper would look like. One problem with this is the progressiveness and memory of what the paper looks like. I'm going to put an anchor here, and I'm going to paint out this image. And in all intents and purposes, it's gone. Well, it is visually. It's still in the computer's memory, though. So if I continue to hold down my mouse and paint over here, it will start painting that original flaw in because it remembers it was there. That's the one I just painted out. What I have to do instead is I can paint here, paint this one out, then let go of my mouse, and now it forgot what was there, and then I paint it out. So it'll just keep following me and picking up the new information. As long as I let go of my mouse, it will just keep going across and picking up the new information. So that's a more effective way to use that tool. You'll get the hang of it once you've used it a few times. I'm just going to go around and keep clicking and setting my anchor point and cleaning up my paper and getting a better look to what's going on. Move down the paper here. I'm going to use this information up there to paint carefully around. Whoops, just got my letter there. Oh yeah, if I run out of paper, so I'm painting here and I run off my paper, there's nothing for it to paint with. Actually, you'll start painting the edge of the paper because that's the information. So be careful with that one. Keep moving your anchor point around. Got to be a little more liquid with this one. Keep adjusting, keep grabbing parts of your paper that you want to use, moving it down. I'm going to go clear up here and come down here and recreate this entire edge of my paper and clean up these ripples down here. Pretty nice, isn't it? I've recreated that entire side of my paper. I can also, I use the Band-Aid for over here. When I want to, notice there's a smudge in my paper. I'm going to just gather her information from part of her dress here, and I had a flaw in my paint. So I'm just going to use the information from her skirt and have it average that in between. Think about it just a little bit. And that's not too bad. It does, if it catches an edge, it will bleed that edge into it, so be careful there. But I can get rid of those smudges in my paint. If I have a smudge here, I have to be careful. I'm going to grab a line quality here, and you'll notice as I move it down, it has a picture of where I'm going to stay. So I'm going to go over to my line and click and hold and paint over. And I got a pretty good edge there. I'm going to make it just a little bit smaller. I want to get rid of that paint blotch. There. Because it had the line to average in, it actually averaged them all together, and it's pretty darn good. So I could finish the rest of this. Once I'm done, I would zoom out. I would use the marquee tool. I would select the portion of the picture that I really want to use. I would go up to image and crop and get rid of the marching ants, and I'd have a nice finished picture that I can start working with now if I want to do something more. So that's enough information to probably make you dangerous. We're going to play in class with this, and you're going to work on some projects using Photoshop and some of these tools to manipulate the images and fine-tune them so you'll get a better image when you want to do output.